On November 7th, Russian forces launched an offensive on the Kupiansk-Svatovo line, but there was no confirmation of any progress. The Ukrainian General Staff reported the failures of offensive operations conducted by the Russians near the towns of Sinkovki, 9 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk, Ivanivka, 20 kilometers southeast of Kupiansk, Berestov, 20 kilometers northwest of Swatovo, and Stelmachivka, 15 kilometers northwest of Swatovo, and about the lack of Russian offensive operations towards Lyman. One influential Russian military blogger claimed that Russian forces carried out attacks around Sinkovka and Petropavlovka, 7 kilometers east of Kupiansk, and took new positions. In turn, Ukrainian military expert Konstantin Mashovets predicted that Russian offensive operations may resume towards Petropavlovka from the north. Attempts to break through to the N26 Kupiansk-Swatovo road from Pershotranev, 24 kilometers east of Kupiansk, and an attack on Ukrainian defensive positions in Stepovo-Novoselichi-Pishchany, 18 to 20 kilometers southeast of Kupiansk in the near future. Mashovets noted that elements of the Russian 25th Motorized Rifle Brigade and the Motorized Rifle Brigade were attempting to attack towards Petropavlovka from Lyman-Pershi, 11 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk. He also stated that elements of the 15th Motorized Rifle Regiment had unspecified partial successes in attacks southwest of Pershotranev, and elements of the 272nd Motorized Rifle Regiment attempted to reach Stelmachivka, 15 kilometers northwest of Swatovo. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed to be financially rewarding soldiers of the Russian Western Group of Forces for destroying equipment provided by the West in the Kupiansk area. Mashovets also pointed to the Russian Central Forces' involvement of the 138th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, which unit, established by the Russian Ministry of Defense in October 2023, is most likely operating below its full terminal strength. On the other hand, the Russian ministry. At the Reuters Next conference in New York on November 8th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed optimism about the country's progress on the path to achieving military goals by the end of the year. Zelensky revealed that Ukraine has a detailed action plan, including specific cities and directions in which they intend to continue their activities. However, the details of this plan were not disclosed. The president mentioned slow but progressive movements in the south and activities in the east of the country. It was mentioned that Ukraine's southern counteroffensive faces significant challenges, and President Zelensky's approach is subject to increasingly in-depth analysis. In this context, at the beginning of the month, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Valery Zaluzhny, compared the situation on the front to a stalemate like during the First World War, which Zelensky publicly questioned, which is a rarity in their cooperation so far. There are concerns that political tensions may escalate due to possible cracks in the president's image, especially in the face of growing calls for new presidential elections in 2024. Addressing his supporters in a speech on the evening of November 6th, Zelensky called for unity and focus on defending the country, suggesting that the elections may not take place unless victory is achieved. Additionally, Zelensky noted that November 8th was a successful day for Ukraine because on that day, the European Commission recommended starting accession negotiations with Ukraine in order to join the European Union, which is a significant step towards Ukraine's integration with European structures. Ukrainian forces continued their offensive operations in the Bakhmut area on November 7th, penetrating deeper into the area according to available information. A Russian military blogger reported on November 6th that Ukrainian soldiers had crossed the railway track near Andriivka, 10 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation issued a statement on the same day that Ukrainian forces had unsuccessfully attacked areas around Rozdołówka, 18 kilometers north of Bakhmut, Minkivka, 15 kilometers northwest, and Klishchyivka, 7 kilometers southwest of that city. A blogger from Russia also mentioned that positional battles are taking place north of Bakhmut in the Soledar area. However, Russian forces took offensive actions near Bakhmut, but no decisive successes were recorded on November 7th. According to a Russian blogger, these troops slightly shifted their lines near Klishchyivka and significantly moved from Berchivka, 6 kilometers northwest of Bakhmut, to Bohdanivka, located the same distance. Yet another Russian blogger reported on November 6th and 7th that Russian forces had regained positions towards Zelenopilia, 4 kilometers northeast of Bakhmut, and had advanced to Vasyukivka, Berchivka and the towns of Sakko and Vantsetti, both 16 kilometers north of Bakhmut, as well as Kliszczyjówka area. However, the Institute of War Studies, ISW, did not record visual evidence of the alleged Russian advances. A Russian blogger claimed on November 6th that Russian forces had launched a counterattack north of Klishchyivka and south of Andriivka, while a Russian news aggregator reported on the same day that Ukrainian troops had been pushed off the section of the railway between the two towns. The Ukrainian General Staff reported on November 7th that the Russians had unsuccessfully attacked areas near Bohdanivka, Kromov, Andriivka, and Kliszchyivka. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that troops of the 98th Guards Airborne Division are operating north of Bakhmut. A Russian missile hit a civilian ship in a port in the Odessa region, killing one person and injuring 4 others, the Southern Defense Forces said on November 8th. A port pilot was killed instantly, and another port worker was injured when a K-31P air-to-surface missile hit the ship above the main deck. Additionally, 3 crew members of the ship, Filipino citizens, were injured, according to Infrastructure Minister Oleksandr Kubrikow. The ship, which flew the Liberian flag, was a civilian vessel transporting iron ore to China. The Odessa District Prosecutor's Office noted that its employees were at the scene of the attack to collect evidence necessary to conduct a war crimes investigation. The attack occurred in the context of Russia's withdrawal from the Black Sea Grains Initiative on July 17th. The Russian Ministry of Defense then stated that ships heading to Ukrainian ports would be treated as potential carriers of military cargo, thus becoming military targets. Since then, attacks on Ukrainian ports and grain transport infrastructure have intensified, especially in the Odessa Oblast. In response to this situation, the Ukrainian Navy opened a temporary corridor in September to enable safe passage of cargo ships to and from ports in the region, which includes the coast of Ukraine and NATO countries such as Romania and Bulgaria, but does not lead directly to the Bosphorus Strait. Despite the route's proximity to NATO countries, security is not guaranteed, as confirmed by the incident on October 5th when a Turkish cargo ship suffered minor damage due to a sea mine located 20 kilometers from the port of Sulina on the Black Sea. At the same time, Ukraine's Southern Operational Command reported on November 1st that Russian warplanes had dropped explosives along the likely route of civilian ships in the Black Sea, which occurred 3 times within 24 hours. At the end of October, the Ministry of Infrastructure of Ukraine reported that despite the risks, more than 1 3/10 million tons of Ukrainian agricultural products and other cargo were exported through the temporary corridor. Russian forces began offensive operations in the Avdiivka area on November 7th, moving forward, according to reports. Russian information shows that on November 6 and 7, these troops made little progress along the railway line near the town of Stepao, located 3 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka. Russian military bloggers reported on November 7th that Russian troops had approached Severny, 6 kilometers west of Avdiivka, but had not entered the settlement. They also reported that Russian forces were moving along the river from Vodyane towards Pervomaiska, 10 kilometers southwest of Avdiivka, and were controlling a waste dump north of Avdiivka, although Ukrainian artillery was preventing them from consolidating in these positions. Russian sources also reported that on November 6th and 7th, there were attacks near Pervomaisky and Stepa, north of Spartak, which is 4 kilometers south of Avdiivka towards Severny, and from the south and east towards Avdiivka. The Ukrainian General Staff reported unsuccessful attack attempts by Russian forces near Stepa, Avdiivka, Tonenka, located 5 kilometers west of Avdiivka, and Pervomaisky. A Russian military blogger noted that Russian forces have switched to more slow offensive operations towards Avdiivka after earlier intense advances, which may indicate a slowdown in the pace of the Russian offensive in the area. Another blogger from Russia mentioned the lack of electronic warfare equipment in favor of Ukrainian airspace control in the area. As a result of Russian attacks in the Bakhmut and Kramatorsky regions of Donetsk on November 8th, 2 women lost their lives and 1 man was injured, according to the regional prosecutor's office. Russian artillery fire fell on the village of Rai Oleksandriivka, which is located about 30 kilometers east of Kramatorsk, which led to the death of a 62-year-old woman in her own home, the prosecutor reported on his Telegram channel. In turn, in the town of Pivnichne, located on the outskirts of Toretsk, another victim, a woman aged 59, died as a result of the Russian strike. The Donetsk Oblast Prosecutor's Office also reported that Russian forces used Grad multi-launch rocket launchers near Bakhmut in the town of Kosovyar. Following this attack, a 50-year-old man with a broken arm and symptoms of concussion was taken to hospital. Since February 24, 2022, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale hostilities against Ukraine, more than 1,700 inhabitants of the Donetsk region have lost their lives and about 4,300 have been injured, said the acting governor of the region, Ihor Moros, on November 8. However, please note that the numbers provided may not reflect the actual situation, as they do not include areas that remain under Russian occupation and the victims of the conflict there. Konstantin Mashevets, a Ukrainian military expert, reported on November 7th that the Russian Air Force conducted 2 patrols in the Black Sea between October 28th and November 3rd using MiG-31 attack aircraft. Shortly before these patrols, at least 4 MiG-31 attack aircraft were transferred to Belbek Airfield in Russian-occupied Crimea, which followed President Vladimir Putin's declaration on October 18th that a Russian military aviation would begin patrolling the Black Sea area. Mashevets noted that the MiG-31 planes that conducted patrol operations over the Black Sea took off from the Mozdok base in the Republic of North Ossetia-Alania and from the Savaslika airport in the Nizhny Novgorod region, and not, as initially assumed, from the Belbek airport in Crimea. The Russian armed forces are seeking to develop their unmanned aerial vehicle capabilities, focusing on first-person perspective FPV drones. On November 7th, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced the establishment of a training center for FPV drone operators as part of the voluntary Pseudo-Platov branch, which is associated with the management of occupied territories in the Zaporizhia Oblast. The ministry emphasized that the training includes learning how to operate FPV drones and using 3D printing technology to create parts for these devices. In turn, a Russian mill blogger expressed appreciation for the increasing use of small and agile FPV drones by Russian troops in Ukraine in 2023, calling it a real technological revolution. Also on November 7th, the TASS news agency reported that in Ukraine, Russian military forces used the S-400 anti-aircraft system for the first time, firing anti-aircraft guided missiles equipped with active homing warheads. According to sources in the Russian Ministry of Defense, in combination with the A-50 aircraft capable of detecting radars at long distances, the S-400 system contributed to the fight against Ukrainian aviation. Russian armed forces are likely to soon deploy a battalion of Ukrainian prisoners of war in Ukraine, in clear violation of the provisions of the Geneva Convention on the Treatment of Prisoners of War. On November 7th, the RIA Novosti news agency reported that Ukrainian soldiers of the Bogdan Khmelnytsky Battalion, which was the first unit composed of former Ukrainian prisoners of war, had taken an oath of allegiance to Russia and would soon be deployed in Ukraine. According to RIA Novosti, this battalion is part of the Kaskad structure operating under the aegis of the Donetsk People's Republic, which implies that the prisoners may be placed on the front line in the area bordering the Donetsk and Zaporizhia oblasts, where reports indicate the activity of the Kaskad formation. Russian sources emphasize that the treatment of prisoners of war will be equivalent to that of Russian soldiers, including comparable pay and benefits. The Institute of War Studies, ISW, previously reported that Russian state media announced that up to 70 Ukrainian prisoners of war from Russian penal colonies had been recruited to join the ranks of the Bogdan Khmelnytsky Battalion. The Geneva Convention clearly prohibits the use of prisoners of war in hostilities by the party that captured them. It emphasizes that prisoners of war may not be sent or held in combat-prone zones, nor may they be forced to perform work that is dangerous or harmful to their health.